The last of the Missouri National Guard members have left the town of Ferguson. Missouri Highway Patrol Captain Ron Johnson has confirmed that as of today. And also, City of St. Louis police officers have returned to normal duty. Things have quieted down. It seems there has been some restoration of normal order in Ferguson. Now, of course, there's been a tremendous amount of discussion about this and media coverage of it. And I wanted to take the time, if I could, to give you a damage assessment of what I think has been done here by the way the dialogue, as they call it, as the media calls it, the dialogue has been conducted. I don't think it is without consequence. In fact, I want to lay out some of what the possible consequences are. But just to give you a sense of, when I say the media, what kind of sentiments am I talking about? What's the way that they decided to frame this whole incident? There was a monologue on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, I guess it was yesterday, that, or might have even been the day before, that was, in my estimation, a sort of summary of how the left wants us to think of this entire issue without us getting too deep into the facts of the individual shooting in this case. Play Jon Stewart, just this clip from The Daily Show.
If you can, just imagine that instead of having to suffer the indignity of a Festivus pole blocking something you could have just set up in your own yard anyway, imagine that instead of that, on a pretty consistent basis, you can't get a f***ing cab, even though you're a neurosurgeon, because you're black. I guarantee you that every person of color in this country has faced an indignity, from the ridiculous to the grotesque to the sometimes fatal, at some point in their, I'm going to say, last couple of hours, because of their skin color.
Every person of color, he says, has faced a possibly fatal situation because of their skin color in the last few hours. This is, of course, Jon Stewart, who is in some ways the most effective mouthpiece of the left because he combines humor when he needs it with seriousness when he wants it, and therefore you can't ever actually debate him or discuss anything with him, because the moment you box him into a corner on a position, he's like, hey, the show before me has puppets on it or whatever. So Jon Stewart's out there, and he's saying this, and I think that we're supposed to all assume a few things. First of all, we're supposed to just accept the facts as he lays them out. But you see, what we've had to have in Ferguson is a debate absent facts, because they're unknown in many cases, or a debate with facts that have been misstated or mischaracterized. For example, Jon Stewart grew up here in New York City. So did I. I've been taking taxis in New York for my whole life, and I was curious about this. I said, okay, well, this is something that you will hear, that an African-American neurosurgeon cannot get a cab in New York City. Well, let's just assume, and there have been studies, and there's some conflicting studies. Usually what the studies now say is that cab drivers are concerned about what neighborhood they will be going to because of the crime rate there. And you might say, well, that's not fair. That's not right. Well, according to OSHA, the federal government agency that's supposed to deal with occupational and safety hazards, cab drivers over the past decade have been 20 to 30 times as likely to be killed on the job as the average American worker. 20 to 30 times. Okay? So just put that into context. I'm not saying that justifies any particular behavior, but that's at least a fact that you would think you would introduce into the discussion. That's just something that people should know. The cab drivers can be concerned and can be worried about what neighborhood they're going to. That is something that we are allowed to say because that's what the studies have shown. But more importantly, this anecdote, and it's one that's often trotted out by the left, I think is interesting because I just wanted to do a little bit of research into, well, what are they trying to say? Clearly, the case being made here is that there's some kind of a a racial animus at work here with cab drivers in the city of New York, the largest city in the country, 8 million plus people. What is actually the truth of that accusation? Well, according to a report put out by the Taxi and Limousine Commission of New York City, the 2014 Taxi Cab Fact Book. Yes, I was up last night reading this because that's what I do with my spare time. By far, the highest concentration of taxi drivers in New York come from Bangladesh, who represent 23% of all taxi drivers. Pakistan is the second most represented country of taxi drivers with 13%. Of all New York City cab drivers, of all of the cab drivers we're talking about who may be choosing not to pick someone up because of their race, which is reprehensible, but let's just look at who's doing this. 6%. 6% come from the United States, and that's of any ethnic background whatsoever. 94% of cab drivers in the city of New York are foreign-born, many of them recently newly arrived. So I would just think that if we're going to have a discussion about race in America, and you're going to use as your example, for example, that people won't be picked up by cab drivers in New York City and then extrapolate that to be a lesson for the rest of the country, maybe you should just look at the fact that almost all of the cab drivers not only aren't of a particular ethnic background, they're not even from this country. They're not even from America. So that doesn't mean it's not a problem, but if you're going to then take that to lecture the rest of the country on race relations, I think that that has some bearing on it. Maybe Jon Stewart should take this up with the consulates of some foreign countries. All the consulates are here in New York City. Say, hey, you got to tell your people that that's not how we do things here. But just it's a way of trying to put this into context. Those are facts that I myself actually didn't. I was curious about that. Never mind. And then if I were to say, and I could tell you this, that I've been turned down dozens of times by cabs that have stopped for me, which is against the regulations. Oh, but then that's just ridiculous. I can't even bring that into the discussion. Even my personal experience is irrelevant. I'm supposed to be lectured by Jon Stewart, who's lecturing us about the personal experiences of other people in this country, which he takes on as his own for the purposes of browbeating people with whom he disagrees politically. That's what he seems so intent on doing. So we were told that we shouldn't wait for the facts in Ferguson. Let's just have the conversation now. That's what the left wanted to do because they wanted to lecture the rest of America. They wanted to have that lecture before there were any facts to make the narrative. Sometimes these things are indeed very complicated and convoluted. There are many different facts and factors that work into them. But perpetuating this narrative of a police officer in Ferguson who murdered a young black man does in fact have very real consequences, particularly because we don't even know if it is true or not. And there are many facts now that would seem to indicate that that specifically is not what happened. But I don't want to criticize those who prejudge by prejudging myself. We still have more to learn about this case. But the left, of course, went with the hyperbolic narrative as soon as they possibly could. And we're all supposed to sit around and accept it when, and I've heard even some fellow conservatives in the media take this position. Well, people are angry, so they're going to loot and riot, and we should accept that somehow. And I refuse to accept that. I think that that is opening the door to more and more lawlessness. And by the way, lawlessness